Spittle from Corporal Marcus Hale's mouth splattered across the deep-lined face of Harold Harry Thompson as the instructor roared, veins bulging in his neck under the scorching sun of Coronado, California. At 72, Harry, a wiry old man with a shock of unruly white hair, looked impossibly small compared to Hale's muscular frame. Around the training yard of the Naval Special Warfare Center, young Navy SEAL recruits stood in silence, watching Hale unleash his daily fury on the veteran who had dared to step into this hell on earth. "This isn't the chess club at the retirement home, old man," Hale barked, his words cutting through the salty air of Silver Strand Beach like a blade. The blazing sun beat down on the golden sand, turning the training ground into a pressure cooker of tension and contempt, where a devastating secret about Harry was about to turn everything upside down. Day 14 of basic training in Coronado, and Harold Harry Thompson had become Corporal Marcus Hale's favorite prey. Hale loomed in front of him, his shadow stretching long over the golden sand, his face carved with open contempt. "Stand up straight, old man," Hale growled, his voice dry and abrasive, like beach sand lodged in his throat. His cold, sharp eyes swept over the wiry frame, the slightly stooped shoulders, and the frayed edges of the training pants. 40 other recruits stood in a ring around them, silent as stone. A few exchanged glances, unable to hide their relief that today, they weren't the target. Some even smirked faintly, finding a cruel kind of comfort in watching an old man become the punching bag for an instructor's wrath. Harry stood there, eyes fixed on the ocean, neither answering nor defending himself. Hot sand pressed into the seams of his boots, sweat traced slow paths down his temples, yet there was something in his posture that refused to bend. "You think you belong here?" Hale stepped closer, his combat boots leaving deep imprints in the sand. "Look at you. A stiff breeze could knock you flat." The familiar answer flashed through Harry's mind on reflex, the one drilled into every service member over decades of training: to serve my country. But he didn't speak it. He only tilted his head slightly, as if the insult wasn't worth the breath it would take to respond. The blazing sun over Silver Strand Beach glinted off Hale's dark sunglasses. He smirked. "Serve your country? You'll be lucky if you get to serve coffee to these young men." A few scattered laughs broke out in the ranks, quickly dying when Hale's gaze swept over them. The old man remained there, unmoving, like a weathered marker that had stood through the tempests of many sailors' lifetimes. After Hale's final order, Harry was assigned a support task, scrubbing the locker room floor with a toothbrush. In the sharp scent of chlorine and damp socks, he knelt, each stroke slow and steady, as if long accustomed to such demeaning chores. No complaints, no signs of strain. Outside the barracks, the sea still pounded the shore, rhythmic as the breath of a giant. Across the bay stood the small seaside home in La Jolla, where Harry lived alone. At night, he sat in an old wooden chair, a military history book in hand, eyes fixed on the horizon. No one knew how many times he had sat like that, waiting for a ship that would never come in. To most people here, Harry was nothing more than a lonely old man, another outdated file in the VA system. But the real reason he had stepped into Coronado's hell at 72 and endured every humiliation Marcus Hale could throw at him was something no one in this platoon could have imagined. The question was, when that secret came to light, would they still dare to laugh?
Welcome to Veteran Life Stories, where real sacrifice meets unforgettable storytelling. Subscribe and keep their courage alive.
Day 15 began beneath a sky blazing blue, the surface of the Silver Strand shimmering with streaks of silver, and the shrill blare of training whistles blasting down from loudspeakers mounted on steel poles. Harry stood at the edge of the training field, his hands resting lightly on the waistband of his trousers, as if to steady the legs that had marched through far too many years of service. The order to run the obstacle course rang out, and Marcus Hale, wearing a smile laced with something unkind, turned toward him. "You'll run alone. Time limit cut in half. If you get tired, Just wave so I can call an ambulance from Balboa, he drawled, his voice dripping with mockery, as though offering some prized privilege. The rest of the platoon let their shoulders ease at least this morning. Hale's attention had picked someone else to torment. The starting whistle split the air. Harry began with slow steps, the sand swallowing his worn shoes as though trying to pull him under. But then, something difficult to explain happened. His breathing shifted deep, steady like it had locked into rhythm with the crashing waves. He wasn't rushing, nor was he struggling. Instead, his movements carried an uncanny economy of effort, each step sliding through the mud pit without a slip, as though he had done this not once, but thousands of times before. A young recruit murmured, "He's done this before." But no one spoke up. In the disciplined silence of Bud's, sometimes quiet was the only way to admit the truth. From her observation point, Petty Officer Andrea Klein shaded her eyes against the glare. When Harry hauled himself over the rope wall, his sweat-soaked training shirt clung to him, revealing a long scar running down his right ribcage. Klein knew at once this wasn't from some minor accident or a civilian surgery. The mark was clean, deep, with a faint twist, something her experience told her only a bullet could leave behind. During the break, while others gulped water or adjusted laces, Klein walked over. Her voice was soft but sure. "Where did you serve, sir?" Harry smiled faintly, as though the question was older than his boots. "Just a regular sailor, Petty Officer Klein. Vietnam, and a few other places." The answer was brief, polite, but his gaze drifted toward the horizon, to a place holding memories that had never been entered into any official report. That night, Hale handed out more duties, scrubbing the deck of the mock-up ship with a toothbrush under the cold glare of the training lights. A task anyone else would have taken as punishment, Harry performed with the precision of a man following a checklist he'd known by heart for decades. No sighs, no wasted movements, only the quiet focus of someone who'd spent a lifetime in places where mistakes didn't just cost points, they cost lives. Still unsettled, Klein headed to the VA Records archive during her lunch break the next day. She searched for Harold Thompson, expecting at least the basics unit, service dates, deployments. But what she found was only a few vague lines. United States Navy, Special Service. No mission notes, no list of commendations, only a void, as though someone had deliberately blacked out the rest. When night fell over Coronado, the sounds of surf and wind-shifting sand formed the backdrop to her restless thoughts. To Klein, a scar could tell an entire story. An empty space in a file could weigh more than any written line. And now, Harry, the old man mocked each morning, had become a puzzle she wanted to solve. But would the truth be as simple as opening a folder? Or would it unravel into a chain of secrets the entire Coronado Center wasn't prepared to face? Comment 1 if you're curious to hear the rest of the story. The water in Coronado's training pool that morning was so clear you could see every white tile strip along the bottom, yet the atmosphere was so heavy it felt like it could be sliced with a knife. The treading water test, one of the most infamous parts of BUD, always wound recruits as tight as piano wire. With a 10-pound weight belt cinched around the waist and a wetsuit soaked through, every kick had to be precise, every breath calculated. 1 minute of misjudgment could mean being yanked to the deck and often sent home for good. Marcus Hale stood at the pool's edge, scanning for his lucky candidate for a bit of personal entertainment. A thin smile crept across his face when his gaze settled on Harry. Standing beside him was Rodriguez, the young Texan who feared the water so much his face paled at the mere sight of a pool. Dream team, Hale thought before ordering them to pair up on the spot. Regulations required pairing recruits of comparable strength to ensure safety, but Hale quietly buckled an extra weight onto Harry's belt. No explanation, just a half-mocking, half-threatening remark. "Hope you swim better than you scrub floors." Rodriguez swallowed hard, while Klein, watching from a distance, frowned and stepped forward to object. Hale ignored her. To heighten the challenge, he opened the valve to let the water rise faster than usual. When the starting whistle shrilled, both men plunged into the frigid blue. Rodriguez flailed, his kicks wild, clawing at the water as though trying to climb it, burning through his air supply at a reckless pace. Harry, showing not the faintest trace of panic, slid closer, placed a firm yet steadying hand on his partner's shoulder, and signaled him to slow down. Sharing his regulator, he fed Rodriguez each breath in measured intervals, guiding him into a controlled, economical rhythm, each movement neat and deliberate, as if he'd rehearsed it his entire life. From the deck, Hale squinted, then, as if to push things further, pressed the button that cut off their oxygen. It was an abuse of authority that, if reported, could send him straight to a court-martial. Below the surface, Harry instantly sensed the change in pressure. Instead of reacting with fear, he removed his mask and looked directly toward the observation window in the pool wall right where Hale stood. His eyes held no outburst of anger, only a cold, measuring focus, as though calculating his next move. With a powerful kick born of years in combat, he propelled Rodriguez toward the emergency escape hatch at the pool's bottom. The younger man was on the verge of collapse, but Harry maneuvered him clear of danger. He followed close behind, rotating his body just in time to hook Rodriguez under the arms, surfacing with him at the lip of the auxiliary pool. They broke the water with heavy gasps, but not a single complaint. Klein immediately hit the emergency alarm, summoning the medics. Rodriguez was hauled out first, wrapped in towels for warmth, while Harry climbed up on his own, brushing aside the offered hands. Water dripped from his silver hair, forming shimmering rings on the sunlit concrete. Silence fell. The recruits who usually mocked him now just stared. The sight of the wiry old man standing tall after pulling a teammate from the edge of drowning, and doing it with almost chilling composure, left them motionless. Hale remained at the pool's edge, a flicker of unease in his eyes, quickly masked with a strained smile. Harry said nothing. He simply gave Hale one more glance, a brief look that carried the weight of a silent challenge. "I'm still here, and I'm not the man you think I am." A low murmur stirred among the ranks. Who is this old guy? Really? It was a question that wouldn't leave their minds until the truth came to light. The morning after that tense underwater training session, Harry was once again assigned a so-called support duty this time, mopping the deck of the mock-up ship before an unannounced inspection by the commanding officer. It was a task that seemed pointless, yet he carried it out with an almost unbelievable precision. Every speck of grime in the steel grooves scrubbed over and over until the metal gleamed as if freshly installed. The heavy thud of boots echoed down the passageway. Captain Elias Blackwood, a living legend of the SEALs, the man who had commanded special operations in Afghanistan, stepped in. He brought no aides, saying nothing at first, simply watching as a gaunt older man bent low, brush in hand, as if performing some sacred act of military discipline. When Harry leaned to reach the lower edge of a bulkhead, his worn training shirt slipped slightly, revealing a faded yet unmistakable trident tattoo. Light caught on the etched lines of the golden trident, the sacred emblem reserved only for those who had endured Bud S and completed special missions. Blackwood stopped in his tracks, his eyes sharpened as if catching the shadow of someone from a distant memory. "Mr. Thompson," his voice slower now, no longer the clipped tone of command. "SEAL Team 3's trident, isn't it?" Harry paused, straightened just enough, and gave a small nod. No explanation, no display of pride, only a quiet acknowledgement. But for Blackwood, it was enough to bring back the image of a man who had once served under his father in a covert South China Sea operation that only a handful had survived to tell about. The official inspection was all but forgotten. Blackwood signaled for Harry to follow him into the auxiliary command room. Dim light washed over their faces, one older, one in his prime, yet both spoke the silent language of men who had known war. Blackwood began, "You're not a regular volunteer. I'm guessing you're here under the Shadowcast program?" Harry leaned back in the chair, fingers interlaced. "That's right," he replied, his voice low but steady. "I was re-recruited at 50. After Vietnam, I thought I'd left it all behind. But when the system started rotting from the inside, I couldn't stand by." Blackwood was silent for a few moments, weighing every word. The Shadowcast program, a covert unit that embedded veterans into training classes to evaluate instructor misconduct, was known only to a select few. With his decades of experience and absolute discretion, Harry was the perfect operative for such a mission. He explained briefly. In recent months, he had deliberately played the part of the useless old man to draw attention and test the moral limits of those leading the recruits. Every incident of bullying, every humiliating chore, all of it, had been documented and sent back to the oversight team. "Not for revenge," Harry said, "but to protect the next generation from those who think power means the right to degrade." Blackwood nodded, silent respect in his eyes. "You know," he said, "my father used to tell me there are victories that will never be told, yet they save more lives than any medal ever could." Harry gave a faint, dismissive smile, as if praise was unnecessary. For him, quiet sacrifice was never about heroics. It was simply the right thing to do. Out in the hallway, footsteps receded. No one knew that inside that room, a piece of the mystery surrounding the old man of Coronado had just been revealed. But was that all? Or were there still layers of the past no one had touched? My friends, stay tuned for the next part 1 that will leave you in awe. And take a second to drop a comment below telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all over the world. News of that day's inspection didn't need an official report to spread. In Coronado, truly remarkable stories traveled faster than any radio signal, from the weight room to the mess hall, from the barracks all the way to the sands of Silver Strand Beach. Overnight, the skinny old man mopping the deck had turned into the mysterious old seal whispered about across the entire platoon. Rodriguez, who had once wanted nothing more than to keep as far away from Harry as possible, was the first to approach. He walked up to Harry early in the morning, while the older man was checking the mooring lines along the pier. There were no lengthy explanations, just a deep, deliberate bow of the head and a short sentence, "You saved me." I'm sorry." His voice trembled and Harry answered with a single nod, no extra words, as if forgiveness had already been waiting for him all along. Andrea Klein, who had suspected something from the start, now wore an expression that was equal parts relief and shame. She wrote a detailed report to Captain Blackwood, attaching every piece of evidence related to Hale's misconduct. Within hours, that report had traveled through secure channels all the way to the desk of Admiral Hargrove at Special Operations Command in Virginia. Hargrove, renowned for his zero-tolerance style, took only 15 minutes to read the file before issuing a decision. The order to relieve Marcus Hale of duty came immediately, citing a violation of Article 92 of the Uniform Code of Military Justice, UCMJ, abuse of authority that endangered subordinates. The news hit the base like a thunderclap, not just for its speed, but because it was rare for a training petty officer to be removed this swiftly. That afternoon, the entire platoon was assembled. There were no smirks or chuckles when Harry walked in. Instead, one by one, each man stood at attention, eyes forward, and when Blackwood gave the signal, they raised their hands in a unified salute. It wasn't just a formality, it was recognition, an apology that words could never fully match. Some of the recruits, especially those from far-flung states like Florida and Texas, wrote handwritten letters to Harry. In them, they admitted they had been wrong to judge him by his appearance, called him the embodiment of a true SEAL, and thanked him for showing them the real meaning of discipline and brotherhood. One card jokingly read, "If a 72-year-old man can pass this test, we've officially run out of excuses to complain." Beyond Coronado, the story took on a life of its own. On veterans forums like the American Legion in Washington, D.C., a photo of Harry standing at the edge of the pool the moment he shoved Rodriguez out of danger was shared thousands of times. The comments didn't just praise him personally, they called for reform in the VA system to better honor and support forgotten veterans. Blackwood, a man of few words, said to Harry in a private meeting, "Your report will save many lives in the future." He didn't say thank you, because both men understood that in this world, true acknowledgement was shown through action, and the removal of Hale was action enough. The change in Coronado wasn't just the result of a disciplinary order. It was in the way the recruits began to see the thin old man not as a burden, but as a mirror, a living proof that the essence of a SEAL wasn't in age or physique, but in will and dignity. And in this atmosphere of newly restored respect, one question still lingered. Was this the final chapter of Harry's story in Coronado, or just the visible tip of a much deeper past? Harry's old pickup truck rolled out of the Coronado gate before dawn, its license plate coated in a thin film of dust from weeks of commuting between the base and La Jolla. The departure paperwork listed only family emergency, a reason so routine that no one asked further questions. Yet for those who had witnessed what he had done here, his absence left behind a void that was difficult to name. On the way home, he pulled over at Silver Strand. The beach was empty, save for the Pacific waves pounding against the golden shore as if trying to echo the rhythm of his youth. This was where it had all begun, the first morning of BUD-S, nearly half a century ago, when he had stood in formation, shivering with cold and nerves, yet never turning away. Now it was the same shoreline, but his hair had turned white, his shoulders narrower, and across his back the trident tattoo, its colors faded, was no longer hidden beneath a worn shirt. That emblem, once the target of jeers, now stood prominently in the official report sent straight to the Pentagon. Captain Blackwood's account did more than recount the pool incident. It recommended reforms to certain clauses in the SEAL training program to prevent abuses of authority like Hale's. The changes were quickly approved, and Harold Thompson's name was recorded as both a witness and a catalyst for change. A few weeks later at Coronado, Harry's old platoon, now led by Klein, held a small ceremony. Not a noisy parade, but a quiet moment before the center's wall of honor. A new brass plaque gleamed in the sunlight, etched with simple words, "Harold Thompson, SEAL Team 3, Integrity and Silence." The same recruits who had once mocked him now stood in formation, caps held to their chests, eyes steady and full of respect. In La Jolla, Harry received an envelope from Blackwood. Inside was a new trident pin, glinting in the soft afternoon light spilling through the window. He settled into the familiar wooden chair by the frame, the ocean stretching out before him, the salty wind carrying memories of years past into the room. His fingers traced the fine engraving on the metal. To anyone else, it might have been just a gift. But to Harry, it was proof that every scar, every silence, every moment of being underestimated had meaning. It was a sign that the past need not be buried, that resolve and loyalty do not fade with age. Outside, a few children ran along the shoreline, their laughter mingling with the sound of the surf. Harry smiled and leaned back slowly in his chair. He didn't need a stage or fireworks, only the knowledge that, in some way, he had helped protect the next generation. Those who would wear the trident on their chest, yet hopefully never endure the things he once had. This story is a reminder that in the vast machinery of the U.S. military, justice sometimes comes from its quietest figures. And perhaps, the person you once dismissed might just be the hero waiting for the right moment to step forward. Do we truly see all the Harrys who walk silently beside us each day? There are heroes who do not need to stand under the spotlight, who seek neither applause nor medals. They live in silence, doing what is right not to be remembered, but because the next generation deserves to be protected. The story of Harold "Harry" Thompson reminds us never to judge someone solely by appearance or age. Sometimes, the person you believe to be fragile carries a strength and courage powerful enough to change an entire system. If you are going through days when you are doubted or underestimated, remember that your true worth is not measured by what others can see, but by how steadfastly you hold to what you believe is right. Thank you for following this story. If it has touched your heart, please leave a comment, share your thoughts, or tell us about a Harry you have met in your life. Don't forget to share this video so the stories of silent heroes can be heard far and wide. And if you want to hear more inspiring stories like this, hit that follow button because the best is yet to come.
Old man, clean that spot properly. A shout cut through the training yard at Camp Pendleton, punctuated by a kick that sent a bucket of soapy water toppling over. The water splashed up, soaking the faded khaki work pants of Elijah Brooks. He stood still, no reaction. He simply bent down and picked the broom back up. At 58, Brooks looked out of place among the young recruits drilling all around, slightly hunchback, slow steps, skin darkened and weathered by the Sunday. To them, he was just a black janitor, an invisible figure working under the 90-degree heat every day. But today was different. As he rolled up his sleeves to mop the spill, an old faded tattoo emerged. A cracked anchor, a snake coiled around a rusted M4. From a distance, a Navy SEAL officer approaching came to an abrupt halt. His gaze froze. "Hold on," he said. "Everyone, attention." They called him Brooks if they remembered his name at all. Most of the time, he was just the old limping black janitor at Pendleton, a quiet shadow in the largest training camp in Southern California, where sweat, dust, and shouting were the official languages. At 58, living alone in a weathered trailer 12 miles away, Elijah Brooks started his shift at 5 a.m. He had no car, hitching a ride on the city's rattling old bus, carrying a lunch wrapped in newspaper, and wearing boots so old no one bothered to ask their age. His steps were slow but steady. The heel of his left foot dragged slightly, leaving faint, dirty streaks on the concrete whenever it rained. No one questioned it. To the young recruits, he was part of the scenery, like the trash cans, the broken chairs, or the out-of-order water cooler in the waiting room. Someone once said he probably served in the kitchen. The group burst out laughing. Brooks heard it, but he just smiled as if the words came from some distant radio station that had nothing to do with him. They didn't hate him. They didn't pity him either. They just didn't care. They were here to become Marines' frontline warriors. And he was clearly just a faded background piece of a past no one talked about. Each day, he cleaned 6 training rooms, 3 firing ranges, 2 shower blocks, and 1 storage shed full of forgotten gear. A few kind souls left him a can of soda or a pack of crackers. Others, usually the newest arrivals, mocked the blurred tattoo that showed beneath his rolled-up sleeve whenever he scrubbed. A cracked anchor, a snake coiled around a rifle that didn't match any Union insignia they'd ever seen. "Look at that. Did someone get ink back in the floppy disk era?" Recruit Ramirez once joked. The whole group roared with laughter. Brooks just rolled his sleeve back down and kept working. It was his 191st day on the job. He had missed a single shift. Sometimes, at midday, he sat alone on the stone bench by the firing range. The sun lit the crease but still sinewy skin around his wrist. He didn't check his phone. He didn't chat. He just chewed slowly on a peanut butter sandwich and watched recruits run the obstacle course as if replaying a piece of memory worn smooth from overuse. Once, a junior training officer passed by, glanced at him, and muttered, "Guys like you should be in a nursing home." Brooks only shrugged. At times, He seemed like a man from another era, one where silence was an answer, where you didn't have to tell anyone what you'd done, only live long enough for them to find out on their own. But no one looked, and he never told. On foggy mornings, Brooks often slowed when passing Warehouse 14, the old weapons storage. He would stop for a few seconds, breathe lightly, then move on. Those few who noticed, though they were few, indeed might have seen him touch the faded tattoo on his arm every time he passed. A small gesture, but not an accidental one. Elijah Brooks didn't need anyone to remember him. But perhaps, just once, he hoped someone might truly look. Every day, he walked past the barbed wire fence, sweeping over the footprints of the young men on their way to becoming heroes. And he, a man who had once been a hero, was treated by this very place as part of the refuse to be cleaned away each morning. But what happens when a real soldier finally sees him? People rarely notice the small things. A flag that's fallen to the floor, an old hand folding it, a silent figure kneeling on dusty cement. But that day someone saw. It was a Thursday morning. The sun wasn't harsh yet, and the main training yard was still quiet. Echo Hall had just finished a weapons drill, leaving the floor dusted with gunpowder residue, muddy boot tracks, and a small American flag knocked loose from its stand. The flag wasn't large, just a symbolic piece for internal display, but to Brooks, it still mattered. He knelt, fingers lightly gripping the edge of the cloth, folding it with precise movements. Corner to the left, a triangle fold pressed evenly. The motions were not quick, but they were flawless. Each fold seemed practiced thousands of times in silence, without show, without performance. With each fold, the room seemed to settle. At that moment, David Morrow stepped in. A Navy SEAL captain newly assigned from Virginia, known for his iron discipline and a record of commanding multiple operations in volatile waters. Angular features, eyes that could cut through the person in front of him, uniform damp with sweat at the collar and chest. He was the kind of man recruits both respected and feared. Morrow had no patience for noise, and even less for sloppiness. Crossing the doorway, he froze. Not because someone was kneeling on the floor, but because the way that person was folding the flag. A ritual he knew, one he had witnessed, learned, and seen his own teammates perform before heading into combat. Brooks didn't know he was being watched. When he finished, he laid the flag on the table as gently as if setting down an old sorrow. Then he bent again to scrub the stain beneath. His face showed no special expression. He wasn't looking for acknowledgement. Morrow approached. The black soles of his boots tapped lightly against the floor. He said nothing for a few seconds, then, in a low voice, half a question to himself, asked, "Who taught you to fold a flag like that?" Brooks looked up. His gaze held neither fear nor excuse. "Back then," he said slowly, "the man who taught me got shot in the middle of folding one." No further explanation, no guiding context, just a single sentence dropped into the room like a stray gunshot breaking into an old dream. Morrow nodded, brow tightening briefly, then turned away. But from that day on, the way he looked at Brooks changed. Not pity, not favoritism, consideration. As if he'd spotted a small clue that could alter the whole story he thought he knew. In the days that followed, Brooks was unexpectedly reassigned to clean higher clearance areas, the map room, the old weapons depot, even sweeping just outside the tactics room, where enlisted men normally weren't allowed without cause. Once, in Warehouse 9, he passed an M4 rifle stripped apart, rusting quietly inside a plastic bin like evidence from another era. He didn't touch it. He simply stood there for a long moment, then pulled the dust cloth back over it as if tucking in an old friend for a final rest. No alarms, no spotlight. Each day went on as before. But something in the way a few recruits regarded him began to shift. One for the first time asked, "You ever served somewhere before?" Brooks didn't answer. He only smiled faintly and went on wiping down the whiteboard with a damp cloth. One afternoon, Morrow happened upon Brooks standing before the memorial wall in the corner of the yard engraved with the names of soldiers lost over the last 30 years. Brooks placed his hand over the fourth line from the bottom, then gave a small nod. No one asked who that name belonged to? But for the first time, a young soldier stepped forward, holding the door so Brooks could push his cleaning cart out of the storage hall. Perhaps in a place like Pendleton, that was already a change. Do you think you can guess what's going to happen next? Take a moment, relax, and drop a 1 or "I'm still here" in the comments to keep listening. Not everyone knows that in the 92-degree June heat at Pendleton, sweat doesn't just dehydrate a man, it can make old memories show their face. That day, Alpha Team was running tactical shooting drills under the relentless Sunday. The ground was dry and cracked, gunfire breaking in short bursts like anxious heartbeats. The instructor kept barking, "Don't slack your stance," but Recruit Griggs, clumsy by nature, misstepped at the edge of the range. In a split second, his M4 flew from his hands and slammed straight into the face of Ramirez, the team's loudest mouth and perhaps the least expected to survive a 5-mile march. Blood spurted from the bridge of Ramirez's nose. He clutched his face and screamed like someone had accidentally severed a tear duct. Chaos erupted. A low voice came over the radio from the nearby command post. "Call Brooks." 10 minutes later, the familiar rattle of an old pushcart approached. Elijah Brooks appeared, mop in hand like it was a weapon of silence. He didn't ask who was hurt or what happened. He simply bent down, took a rag, and began blotting the blood. The disinfectant mixed with the blood, pooling into dark and light stains like a map no one wanted to remember. The heat soaked his shirt with sweat. His right sleeve, frayed and shrunken, clung to his skin. And then beneath the damp fabric, an old tattoo emerged. At first, it was just a smudge of black. But the midday sun was merciless. It pulled the curtain off the past like unveiling a forgotten stage. A cracked anchor, a serpent coiled around a rusted M4, and at the base almost faded away a small insignia that only a handful in the special operations community had ever seen. Ramirez spotted it first. Even with his nose stuffed full of tissues, his voice carried like a busted loudspeaker. "The old man's got ink, for real?" Then he laughed out loud. "What is this, the G.I. Joe Reject Squad? Or the 2087 Washed Up Vets Club?" Others gathered, laughed along. One mock saluted like in an action movie. Another clapped Brooks on the shoulder from behind, joking, "Reporting for duty, Agent Mop-Up." Brooks didn't answer, didn't turn. Just kept mopping slow, steady, as if erasing a story someone else had tried to write wrong. Then came a short, sharp command, cold as a blade. "All of you stand at attention." Not everyone knew the voice, but those who had served recognized it instantly. The voice of authority, and more than that, the voice of a man who had lost too much to waste patience on ignorance. Captain David Morrow stepped out from the far corner of the range, his eyes locked on Brooks's arm. No one dared move. He closed the distance, stopped a few paces away, looked at the tattoo not like an old emblem, but like a living piece of evidence. Alpha Team held its breath. Ramirez looked like he wanted to stuff extra tissue in his mouth to keep from saying something stupid. Moore didn't turn to them, didn't lecture. He just spoke, loud enough for Brooks and maybe a few nearby to hear. "Hormuz operation, Bravo 7, rear guard." Brooks said nothing. but his eyelids flickered a small thing, but different. Something passed between the two men in the sun, a story only they understood. Mara turned toward the young soldiers. The silence was like a military tribunal. That tattoo, you won't find it in any manual. No one wears it anymore, because no one else from that team is alive, except him. No one breathed too hard. Ramirez stood frozen, lacking only a "I regret this" badge on his chest. Mara nodded once to Brooks. No salute, no orders, just quiet recognition. The range went dead silent. The last stain of blood was gone. From that day forward, no one called Brooks the old janitor again, but a new question began to surface. Why would a hero come back to mop floors among those who had forgotten him? There are moments when time doesn't stop, yet everyone stands still. That noon on the training field felt frozen. Not because of the Southern California heat, not because of the blood on the ground, and not because of Brooks the black man with a mop in his hands, but because of something else that had just appeared, the truth. David Mara, a Navy SEAL captain who had once commanded in the Gulf, stood less than an arm's length from Brooks. His eyes weren't squinting against the sun, they were narrowed from a restrained surge of emotion. Slowly he pulled off his gloves and rolled up his sleeve on his left bicep, where an old wound from an amphibious landing had long since healed was a tattoo. The same as Brooks's, but sharper, more intact, preserved like an unspoken oath. 2 tattoos, one past, a truth buried for 30 years. Morrow spoke quietly, just loud enough for the circle of recruits to hear. You were the rear guard gunner at the Hormuz Strait. Bravo 7. The man who held position for 27 minutes under fire so my entire unit could withdraw safely. Brooks stood still. He didn't deny it. He didn't confirm it with words either. But that silence on ground, normally reserved for orders and gunfire, was the truest statement there was. A young recruit blurted out, his voice trembling, "That really happened?" Morrow didn't answer right away. He scanned each face, as if administering a moral exam with no perfect score. Then he said, "If it weren't for him, I wouldn't be standing here. And none of you would have anyone to teach you how to shoot." No one laughed. No one moved. Ramirez, the one who had once mocked the tattoo, looked paler than a block of frozen meat. Mara turned back, resting a hand lightly on Brooks's shoulder. Not the touch of a superior officer, but of a man who had once survived because of another's courage. It was gratitude that needed no applause. Then he walked away, leaving Brooks in the center of eyes that no longer saw him the same way. It was the quietest moment Pendleton had that summer. That afternoon, Brooks still cleaned as usual, but for the first time, someone stepped forward to hold a door open for him. Recruit Griggs, the one whose stumble had spilled blood, awkwardly asked, "Can I clean with you?" Brooks simply smiled and handed him the old rag. Griggs lasted less than 2 minutes before sweating like he'd run a mile. Breathless, he glanced over. "How do you do this every day?" Brooks gave a faint smile, no answer. He looked out at the field where the sunset was dropping and kept scrubbing away dusty boot prints. That night in the command office, Morrow opened the internal files. The name Elijah Brooks appeared once in the Hormuz 2093 operation roster. Then it was shifted to logistical support, with the note, "Did not continue active duty." No explanation why. No injury report. No commendation. Just a record cut short, like a film missing its final scene. Morrow printed the file, slipped it into an envelope, told no one. The next morning, Brooks arrived earlier than usual. He carried his lunchbox, a pair of gloves, and an old leather notebook from which a few loose sheets had slipped. During a break, he pulled out one and smoothed it flat. It was a hand-drawn tactical map of the Hormuz Strait movement lines, support fire positions all yellow with age. A single red dot, marked, final position B 7:27 minutes. Brooks sat there, in the empty yard. No one disturbed him. A few who passed gave a small nod. From a distance, Mara approached, no uniform this time, an envelope in hand. He set it beside him. "This has been yours for a long time." Brooks opened it and looked inside. His face didn't change, but his hand tightened ever so slightly. A fleeting moment, just long enough to reveal the presence of a wound finally touched by healing. That night, for the first time in years, the lights in the barracks stayed on late. A group of recruits sat listening to Mara talk about the Hormuz operation, not through PowerPoint, but in the voice of a man who carried a debt. He said, "When the whole team was trapped in a siege, there was one man who volunteered to hold the last position. He wasn't the biggest, he wasn't the fastest, but he was the most accurate shot and braver than all of us." One recruit asked quietly, "He did that for what?" Mara gave a faint, dry smile. "For nothing, because it was the right thing to do. Their medals never awarded, their heroes never remembered. But sometimes a single sentence from the right person is enough to silence an entire training field. And what would you do if the man mopping your floors every day was the same one who once saved dozens of lives in the dark?" My dear audience, stay tuned for the next part that will leave you in awe. Take a second to comment below and tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all around the world. Silence. That was the first thing. There was no loud apology, no burst of applause after Mara publicly revealed Brooks's identity. Only a quiet that lingered, like the pause in the military march just before the highest note. Ramirez, the one who joked without knowing his limits, lowered his head. No one ordered him to. No one criticized him. He simply stepped back, then turned away, his face like someone who had just torn away a scrap of careless youth. But it was that very silence that made everything begin to change. A week later, on one of Pendleton's rare foggy mornings, a small wooden plaque appeared in the corner of Echo Hall, right where Brooks had once knelt to fold the flag. No announcement, no formal ceremony, but everyone who passed slowed their steps when they saw the engraving. "Honor the quiet giants." Below it, just one line. Elijah Brooks, Bravo 7, Hormuz Gulf, 1993. No medals, no ranks, no official seal, yet the plaque became a quiet stopping point, a place where recruits began setting down their coffee cups as they passed, or removing their caps in a brief salute before stepping onto the training field. Brooks never knew who had put it there. He didn't ask. But the afternoon it appeared, he stood before it for a long time, broom in hand, as if the concrete beneath had suddenly become harder to sweep. From that day on, he arrived 10 minutes earlier each morning. Not to do extra work, but to dust the plaque. Quietly, slowly, like wiping dew from a mirror that had long been forgotten. The change wasn't loud. It moved like sea wind's silent yet whitening hair, one day at a time. The first time, a recruit stood at attention and saluted Brooks as he pushed his supply cart past the mess hall. The second time, someone stepped in to help him lift a box of cleaning solution. No words, just a nod. By the third time, 3 recruits, including Ramirez, asked to sit with him at lunch. Brooks just chuckled. "Smells like bleach over here." But they stayed. And Ramirez told the story of his rifle mishap for the first time. without mocking himself, just as a lesson before turning to ask, "You really don't hate me, do you?" Brooks looked at him, winked. "You remind me of a buddy talked too much, took a bullet to the nose. Great shot, though, just terrible at dodging." The table erupted in laughter. This time, the laughter was different. Not ridicule, but the sound of someone being forgiven without a word spoken. From then on, Brooks wasn't just the old janitor. During breaks, a few recruits started asking him about Bravo 7, about the Hormuz Gulf, about the things never found in training manuals. Brooks would usually just smile, lean back against the wall. Those stories aren't for daytime. And if anyone pressed further, he'd nod toward the ocean. "When you can hear the wind coming from that way, you'll understand." No one really understood, but everyone nodded as if they did. Sometimes not fully understanding is a way to respect what can't be named. 3 weeks later, Alpha Team completed its training cycle. At the final ceremony, Morrow didn't give a long speech. He stood at the back, watching, but when the recruits saluted the flag one last time, something happened that had never occurred before. Brooks was invited to raise it. No objections, no murmurs. He stepped forward, slowly, holding the halyard with the same hand that once gripped a rifle stock in the Hormuz Gulf. The flag rose straight and steady, without haste. When it unfurled in the wind, something in the morning light shifted. Every young Marine there stood just a little straighter, as if gravity had suddenly eased, or as if for the first time they understood what honor really meant. Brooks said nothing, but afterward Morrow turned to him and spoke quietly. "There are things you can't fix with orders, only by doing the right thing. Thank you for waiting for that to happen." Brooks nodded, placed a hand over the tattoo beneath his sleeve, then turned away, pushing his familiar cart toward the storage sheds. That evening in the mess hall, Recruit Griggs set a small wooden box on Brooks's table. Inside was a custom-made challenge coin. On one side, the Bravo 7 insignia. On the other, the inscription, "For remembering the silent by action, not by noise." Sometimes an entire generation needs a janitor to remind them. Honor doesn't come from what people call you, it comes from how you live when no one calls your name. If you've ever looked down on someone because of their job, maybe it's time you ask yourself, do you really know who they are? That Friday, the sky wasn't as bright as usual. The wind from the ocean swept in, lifting the thin layer of dust off Pendleton's training grounds. Everything felt unusually still, as if the entire base was holding its breath for something about to be set right. Morrow arrived early in the morning, without a uniform, without insignia. In his hands was a small wooden box, varnished to a soft sheen but marked with a few scratches. He'd found it in the military archives, a place where things forgotten are kept safe, their value never diminished. Brooks was polishing the wooden plaque with his name carved into it, as he did every day. His hands were still steady, but his steps seemed lighter than they had been a month ago. He no longer lowered his head. He no longer avoided anyone's eyes. Morrow stopped beside him, saying nothing at first. He simply set the box down and opened it. Inside lay a bronze star medal, its surface a deep-aged bronze resting on a piece of velvet worn thin with time. The engraving beneath read, "Elijah Brooks, for valor in combat, Gulf of Hormuz, 1993. No one had presented the medal on the day Brooks should have received it. At that time, he wasn't there. because at the very hour of the ceremony, he was on the back of a military truck, wrapping the body of a fallen teammate in his own old field jacket, the same jacket he now used to pat his back when scrubbing floors. Brooks looked into the box. He didn't smile. He didn't show surprise. He was simply silent. Then he glanced down at his arm, at the faded tattoo, the cracked anchor, and the snake coiled around the rifle. The same tattoo that had once made him the subject of ridicule was now a symbol no one dared disrespect. And for the first time in many years, he stood up straight. Not because someone told him to, but because it felt right. His chest rose, not to accept a medal, but to state, "I'm still here." Mara nodded. His voice was low, calm, but strong enough to cut through every layer of silence. "Thank you for not disappearing." Brooks turned to him. His eyes narrowed slightly, a thin smile tracing across his face like a wind-cut line over the sea. I never disappeared. You all just weren't looking in the right place." That day, in the backyard of the training compound, a few recruits put together a small BBQ. It wasn't on the schedule. It wasn't by military protocol. It was simply their own way of saying thank you. Ramirez brought a burnt-edged pie. "First time trying," he said, and set it down in front of Brooks as if presenting some sacred offering. Griggs handed Brooks a clumsy hand-drawn sketch, him pushing the mop cart with a squad of soldiers following behind. Beneath it was a hastily scrawled line, "Not all heroes wear boots." Brooks said nothing. He quietly ate the charred pie, giving a small smile when he bit into a particularly hard piece, then nodded to each of them in turn. He wasn't used to being the center of attention, but he no longer shied away from it. Late in the afternoon, before leaving the yard, Brooks stood in front of the wooden plaque with his name. His hand traced the words, "Honor the Quiet Giants," as if rereading a story he himself had once forgotten. The wind blew gently. The flag above still waved. But this time Brooks wasn't the one raising it. Another recruit had done it at his place, and he stood straight, eyes fixed on the flag, no longer turning away like in the early days. Brooks nodded. Not to say good job, but the way someone who had once held the rear guard looks at a new generation ready to step forward without needing him to lead them by the hand. No one truly disappears if their actions keep living on in the quiet others finally choose to hear. And sometimes a tattoo fades not because of time, but because it has fulfilled its purpose. Are you listening to the quiet ones around you? There are people who never speak up, never claim credit. They live quietly, endure misunderstanding, and choose silence because they think no one needs them anymore. Yet these very people, through nameless acts of kindness, have built the foundation that future generations stand upon. Elijah Brooks' story isn't only about a forgotten veteran, it's about all those who have sacrificed unseen, contributed without recognition, and perhaps they're closer than you think. The neighborhood security guard, the elderly lady selling goods by the roadside, or the person who cleans your office every night. Have you ever met a quiet hero like that? Share your story in the comments. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and pass this video along to someone who needs to be seen even just once. Because sometimes a small acknowledgement can make an entire life stand up again.